For more than 3,000 years, Egypt was a center of beauty, balance, and brilliant ideas. They built monuments that have outlasted empires. They studied the stars, healed the sick, wrote in sacred symbols, and shaped stone with precision we still admire today. Let's journey together to a land of golden sands and flowing waters, to a place where the past feels warm and alive, where time doesn't rush forward, but moves gently in circles. You're about to explore ancient Egypt, a civilization so enduring, so astonishingly advanced, that even today, we still walk in the shadow of its knowledge. Because the story of Egypt is not loud, it whispers. As you settle in, allow your breathing to slow. Feel your shoulders soften. Let the world around you fade into the hush of an ancient desert evening. A breeze stirs the palms. The last rays of the sun touch the smooth stones of a temple wall, and nearby, the river flows, as it always has. You are safe here, in the arms of history, so when you're ready, we'll begin. This is why ancient Egypt remains the most advanced civilization, a gentle exploration of a people who built for eternity, who listened to the sky, and who remind us even now that wisdom does not need to shout. Welcome to Drift Off to History, where we bring calm stories for curious minds. Chapter 1. A timeless land. You find yourself standing at the edge of a slow-moving river. The water is smooth and dark, reflecting the dusky sky in ripples of gold and blue. Along the banks, tall reeds sway gently in the evening breeze, and somewhere nearby, a heron glides silently into the shallows. This is the Nile. And for the people of ancient Egypt, it was everything. Before kingdoms, before temples, before writing, there was the river. It flowed north through a narrow strip of fertile land, bordered on both sides by the desert's warm, endless hush. And each year it rose, softly, steadily, predictably. The floods came in summer, bringing rich black silt, a gift from faraway rains, and when the waters receded, they left behind fields ready to grow wheat, flax, and barley. This rhythm was life itself. To the ancient Egyptians, this annual cycle wasn't just a natural event, it was sacred. They saw it as a blessing from the gods, a sign of harmony between earth and sky, man and nature. The world, they believed, was meant to follow this kind of balance, a balance they called Ma'at. Ma'at was more than just an idea. It was the invisible order behind everything, the reason the sun rose, the seasons turned, and justice could be known. People lived by it, prayed for it, and built their society upon it. Kings ruled in its name. Farmers planted by its rhythm. Even scribes, when they dipped their reeds into ink, were said to be aligning their work with Me'at, shaping the world through words. And so, life moved gently in this land, not hurried or restless, but cyclical, rooted, peaceful. From the highlands of Nubia to the wide Nile Delta, the rhythm of Egypt continued for thousands of years, one of the longest-lasting civilizations in all of human history. Close your eyes, if you like, and imagine a village beside the river. It is early morning. The sun has just risen, warm and golden, painting everything in soft light. A child carries a clay pot. A woman tends to rows of green vegetables. A boat slides past, its sail curved like the moon. These scenes, repeated endlessly across centuries, shaped the soul of Egypt far more than its monuments or kings. The seasons here were quiet teachers. The inundation brought water and silt. The growing season followed, when the soil, now dark and rich, welcomed seeds. Then came the harvest, when families gathered beneath palm trees to collect the fruits of their labor. This cycle was not rushed. There were no machines, no artificial urgency, just the slow, dependable rhythm of nature, embraced and honored. Even the desert, which might seem dry and lifeless, was respected, not feared. It formed a quiet border, protecting the civilization like a wall of golden silence. On certain days, the wind would sweep gently across the sands, carrying the faint scent of myrrh and acacia. At night, the temperature dropped and the air cooled, revealing a sky filled with stars so clear and bright they seemed close enough to touch. Wildlife thrived along the riverbanks. You might have seen ibis wading at the edge of the water, or a crocodile drifting in the reeds, still and ancient. Hippos bathed in the shallows at dusk. Desert foxes darted between the rocks, and above it all, falcons soared, sacred birds, linked to Horus, protector of the pharaoh and symbol of divine kingship. Even the sounds were part of the atmosphere. The splash of a fishing net, the call of a goose overhead, the steady creak of a wooden water wheel. Life was not silent, but it was soft, a continuous murmur of life, too gentle to disturb. Within the villages, families lived in mud brick homes with flat rooftops that caught the breeze. These rooftops were places of gathering, of meals shared, of stories told beneath the moonlight. Inside, walls were plastered smooth, the floors packed with earth, and shelves carved into the walls held everyday items, jars of grain, oil lamps, woven baskets, and precious amulets to bring protection and luck. Even in the greatest temples and tombs, echoes of this quiet life can be found. Carvings of geese, of fig trees, of fishermen casting nets into the river. The grandest stone structures began with ordinary hands, with people who understood the land, the seasons, and the needs of the body as deeply as they understood the gods. And yet there was grandeur too, always. Because Egypt was a land of contrast, the calm of everyday life, and the awe of the eternal. Above simple homes rose towering obelisks, angled toward the sun. Alongside humble farms stood temples where incense curled in the air and chants echoed between stone pillars. But all of it, the small and the vast, existed in harmony. This is perhaps why Egypt feels so advanced, even now. Not because of its wealth or its power or its scale, but because it understood something we are still learning, that to build something lasting, we must move slowly, intentionally, in tune with the world around us. The desert that surrounded the Nile was more than a barrier. It was a protector. It kept Egypt safe from invasions, and it preserved things, papyrus scrolls, wooden coffins, even footprints in dried mud. The heat, the dryness, the silence, all helped Egypt survive. Not just in memory, but in form. We can still walk into tombs where the paint is fresh, where the names of long-gone scribes remain visible, as though they had just stepped away for a moment. This sense of timelessness is everywhere, in the sand, in the stone, in the shape of the river. It is part of what makes ancient Egypt feel so different, so steady, so advanced. Because while other cultures surged forward and collapsed, Egypt endured, not by racing ahead, but by walking with care. And so we begin here, by the water's edge, in the hush of an early morning, beside the river that gave life to one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known, a civilization rooted in rhythm, in balance, in time that did not rush, but ripened slowly, like dates in the sun. The river flows on, quiet, unchanging, just as it always has. Chapter 2. People of Precision and Ritual. As the soft morning light stretches across the river, you begin to walk inland, away from the reeds and rippling water, toward the horizon, where something extraordinary rises from the earth, not suddenly, not defiantly, but calmly, as if it has always belonged. There, in the warm hush of the desert, stands a temple, pale and smooth, its stones still warm from yesterday's sun. Each block is shaped with care, joined so perfectly You cannot slide even a thread between them. The lines are clean, the shadows fall just so, and every part of it, every corner, every step, means something. This is not a building made to impress, it is a building made to honor. The ancient Egyptians did not separate their architecture from their beliefs. They saw no division between stone and spirit, between the physical and the divine. To build was to offer a prayer in permanent form, and to walk through a temple was to walk through a story, one written not with words, but with space, light, and intention. Many temples began at the river's edge. Visitors would arrive by boat, step onto processional pathways, and enter through towering pylons, massive gateways inscribed with scenes of pharaohs and gods. Beyond them, courts opened to the sky, their pillars carved with lotus blossoms and papyrus stems, the plants of Upper and Lower Egypt, side by side in harmony. Deeper still, one would move into columned halls, cool and dim, where the air smelled of incense and stone. The further you went, the darker it became, until finally, in the heart of the temple was the sanctuary, a small silent chamber that held the sacred image of the god. Only priests could enter here. The light of the sun never touched this place. It was illuminated instead by ritual, by memory, by reverence. Some temples were designed so that on a single morning each year, the rising sun would shine down a narrow corridor and illuminate the statue within. This was not coincidence. This was careful design. The Egyptians understood the rhythms of the sky and mirrored them in stone. They used ropes, water levels, and shadows to achieve remarkable alignments. This was sacred geometry, a quiet science, practiced with patience. And then there were the pyramids. The Great Pyramid at Giza remains one of the most astonishing human achievements ever created. More than 4,000 years old, it still stands in near-perfect symmetry. Its sides align almost exactly with the cardinal points, north, south, east, and west. Its base is level to within a fraction of a degree. Each block, some weighing as much as a car, was carefully placed by hand, without modern machinery. And yet, it has not shifted, not collapsed, not faded. It is still here. How they did it, we still don't fully know. There are theories, ramps, pulleys, counterweights, but none explain everything, and perhaps they don't need to. What matters more is the intention, the desire not just to build, but to align, to create something that mirrored the universe itself. The pyramid was more than a tomb, it was a map, a symbol of rebirth, a passageway to the stars. Inside its chambers, pharaohs were buried not in silence, but in ceremony, surrounded by texts, by amulets, by symbols of eternity, and above it all, the structure itself, a mountain of stone rising toward the heavens, stood as a reminder that life does not end, it transforms. This reverence for symbolism was everywhere, in clothing, in art, in daily gestures. Egyptians wore linen for its purity, adorned themselves with amulets in the shape of eyes, beetles, and ankhs, each carrying protective or spiritual meaning. The color green meant rebirth, the color gold, divinity. Even perfumes had purpose, each blend meant to please a specific god or to ward off certain spirits. Ritual was not confined to temples. It lived in the quiet habits of ordinary people, in the lighting of oil lamps at dusk, in the sprinkling of water before a shrine, in the placing of flowers at doorways or bits of bread beside tiny altars. The home was sacred too, a place where the divine might dwell unseen, where life and spirit met. Even the act of cleaning, of sweeping the floor, of washing one's hands, held symbolic meaning. To remove dust was to restore harmony. To purify space was to invite balance. Everything had purpose, Everything was part of something larger. Time, too, was shaped by ritual. The year was divided not by temperature, but by sacred phases: the inundation, the growing season, and the harvest. Each came with its own rituals, songs, and offerings. Festivals were held to honor the gods. Great processions where statues were carried through the streets, accompanied by music, dancing, and fragrant smoke. The line between celebration and worship was beautifully blurred. Even death was not an interruption. It was a transition, a movement into another form of life. And so, the rituals of burial were among the most detailed of all: cleansing the body, wrapping it with linen, placing charms and scrolls in the tomb. These acts were not simply tradition, they were bridges, helping the soul cross from one shore to another. The same mindset extended to craftsmanship. A chair was not just a chair, it reflected balance. A necklace was not just decoration, it protected the heart. Artisans did not work with haste, but with care, with understanding, with intention. And perhaps this is what set ancient Egypt apart. Their advancement was not defined by how fast they could build, but by how well. Not by how much they knew, but by how deeply they lived what they knew. Their rituals were not rules, but rhythms, gentle habits that brought structure, beauty, and meaning to the simplest of days. Imagine now, standing once more within the shade of a temple wall. You place your hand on the stone, warm from the sun. You feel the depth of it, the calm, the purpose. You're not rushed. You're part of something slow and sacred. So rest here a while longer. Let the coolness of the inner chamber hold you. Let the silence speak, and let the soft wisdom of ritual remind you that life, when lived with care, becomes timeless. Chapter 3. Life beside the Nile. The sun hangs gently above the horizon, casting long golden reflections across the river. In the distance, you can just make out the soft sound of wooden oars dipping into the water, slow, steady, rhythmic. A boat glides by, its sail catching the morning breeze, its passengers quiet as they move with the current, not against it. This was the rhythm of life in ancient Egypt, not loud, not hurried, but peaceful, grounded, and shaped by the river that nourished every field, every village, every soul. The Nile was not just a source of water, it was the center of existence, a giver of life, a keeper of time, a path that connected the far south to the northern delta, where the river met the sea. Along its banks, daily life unfolded with quiet familiarity. Most people in ancient Egypt were farmers, and their lives followed the seasons of the river. In the flood season, they waited. The water rose high and spread wide, soaking the fields with rich dark silt. During the growing season, they planted rows of wheat and barley, using simple wooden tools and strong, calloused hands. And when the harvest came, they gathered the grain, dried it in the sun, and stored it in large clay granaries shaped like beehives. Their tools were humble: plows drawn by oxen, baskets woven from palm fibers, sickles made of wood and flint, but their knowledge was deep. They understood when to sow, when to reap, how to manage water channels, how to coax life from soil. Farming was hard work, but it was sacred. It honored the gods and followed the great cycles of Ma'at, the balance of all things. In the villages, life moved gently. Homes were built from sun-dried mud brick, their walls thick to keep out the heat. Roofs were flat, creating shaded spaces for sleeping, cooking, and talking under the stars. Inside, there were few rooms, just open areas where families lived together, shared meals, told stories, and rested after long days of labor. The scent of fresh bread often drifted from doorways. Women would grind grain using rounded stones. mixing the flour with water and salt before shaping the dough into flat loaves and baking them in clay ovens shaped like beehives. In large jars, they stored fermented beer, thick and nourishing, flavored with dates or herbs. Meat was a luxury, but fish was common, pulled from the river with nets and lines. Dates, figs, onions, and lentils added sweetness and flavor to even the simplest meal. Children played in the courtyards and along the river's edge. They ran barefoot through the dust, their laughter soft and bright. They played with carved wooden animals, balls made of leather, and dolls stuffed with reeds. Older children helped their families, carrying water, gathering firewood, helping in the fields. And always they listened, to their elders, to the stories, to the rhythm of the world around them. There were no clocks, no alarms. Time was marked by natural cues, the position of the sun, the opening of lotus flowers, the sound of frogs in the reeds. Life unfolded not in minutes and hours, but in tasks and rituals. A woman pouring water from a painted jar, a man weaving rope from papyrus, a grandmother grinding spices in a stone bowl. These small actions made up the gentle pulse of Egyptian life. Each village had its own craftsmen, potters, carpenters, weavers, and stonemasons, who passed their skills from parent to child. In workshops near the edge of town, the scent of beeswax and cedar filled the air. Here, fine linen was spun, jars were shaped and fired, sandals were stitched from palm fibers. Jewelry made from faience and semi-precious stones shimmered in the light, not only for beauty but for protection. The scribe too was a central figure, often one of the only people in the village who could read and write. With a reed pen and black ink, they recorded harvests, property boundaries, letters, legal agreements, and dreams. They kept the rhythm of the village in scrolls and ledgers. But they also wrote hymns and stories, preserving not just the facts of daily life, but its feelings too. And then there were the festivals. Throughout the year, the village gathered to honor the gods. On feast days, statues were carried from the temple into the streets, wrapped in fine cloth and perfumed with incense. Musicians played lyres and flutes, and dancers moved with slow flowing grace. There were offerings of bread, fruit, and flowers, simple gifts of gratitude. These were not grand spectacles. They were acts of devotion, woven into the life of the people. Religion, for the Egyptians, was not something separate or occasional. It was part of the air they breathed. Small shrines could be found in many homes, little niches in the walls where people placed offerings, lit oil lamps, and whispered prayers. They asked the gods for health, for good harvests, for protection, and they gave thanks, always thanks. The gods were many, but they were close. Hathor, the goddess of love and music. Bes, the protector of households and children. Thoth, the god of wisdom. Isis, the gentle mother. These gods were not distant. They watched over the people, shared their joys and sorrows, lived among them in every corner of life. At the end of each day, as the sun dipped low and painted the river with soft fire, families gathered on rooftops or sat quietly by the water. The desert air cooled, the stars returned, the world slowed, and in those moments of stillness, the people of Egypt found rest, not from escape, but from belonging. Because for them, life was not a struggle to conquer time. It was a dance within it. Imagine now the hush of twilight along the Nile. A small flame flickers in an oil lamp. The scent of herbs hangs in the air. A bowl of dates sits between two sleeping children. Somewhere, a father hums a lullaby he learned from his father. The river flows past, calm and dark, reflecting the stars. Nothing is urgent, nothing is wasted. These are the moments that shaped a civilization. Not only the monuments or the kings, but these The quiet kindnesses, the slow rituals, the hands that fed, built, and healed. Egypt was great, not just because it built high, but because it lived deeply, and so the Nile flows on, carrying not just water, but memory. Chapter 4. Medicine, Numbers, and Knowledge. The stars have shifted now, drifting slowly across the sky above the Nile. The land is quiet, the fields are resting, and in a shaded corner of a small home, a man leans over a scroll of papyrus, his fingers stained with ink, his lips moving silently as he reads the lines before him. He is a scribe, a keeper of knowledge, and what he reads tonight is not a prayer or a record of grain, but something far more delicate. It is a medical text, instructions for treating a wound, easing a fever, or tending to the pain of childbirth. In ancient Egypt, healing was a sacred art. It was not separated from a religion, nor confined to temples. It lived in the hands of wise women, prowess physicians, midwives, and traveling healers. Some were trained in temple schools. Others learned through apprenticeship, experience, or tradition passed down in whispers and gestures from one generation to the next. And though many treatments involved magic and incantation, this was not mere superstition. The Egyptians believed that the health of the body and the health of the soul were connected. Healing was a conversation between the physical and the spiritual, between nature and the divine. One of the most famous scrolls, the Ebers Papyrus, contains over 700 remedies. Some were herbal mixtures, honey for infections, known for its antibacterial properties, garlic to improve circulation, fig paste to soothe coughs. Others relied on minerals like natron, a type of salt used to clean wounds or preserve the body. There were poultices, teas, powders, and ointments, and each one was recorded with care, dosages noted, symptoms described, rituals included. Pain was eased with poppy extract, inflammation was treated with castor oil, burns were soothed with crushed leaves and animal fats. The Egyptians knew the value of observation. They watched how the body responded. They learned what helped and what harmed. Their methods, though ancient, were often surprisingly effective. And when physical treatments were not enough, there were spells, words to drive out sickness, charms to protect unborn children, prayers to the goddess Sekhmet, feared and revered, who governed disease and its cure. Healing was a full-body practice, mind, body, spirit, brought into harmony. Midwives assisted in childbirth, supporting mothers with warm compresses, scented herbs, and whispered encouragement. Amulets were placed around the home to ward off evil. Birth bricks, painted and blessed, were used during delivery, giving mothers something sacred to hold. In all of this, there was tenderness, a deep understanding that life was fragile and sacred. Beyond healing, Egyptian knowledge extended into the realms of mathematics and measurement. Their numbers were not abstract puzzles, but tools for living. They used them to count cattle, record harvests, and measure the angle of walls and pyramids. Their number system was simple, yet flexible, built from lines, coils, and shapes, written in tall columns that climbed like papyrus stalks. Geometry was born out of necessity. When the Nile flooded each year, it erased the boundaries between farms. Surveyors, known as rope stretchers, used knotted cords to redraw the lines, walking slowly along the riverbanks to restore order. This act of measurement became an art, and eventually a science. With this same knowledge, they built structures that aligned with the stars. Temples whose doorways captured the morning sun on solstice. Pyramids whose slopes followed careful proportions. Their understanding wasn't just technical, it was intuitive. It came from being deeply present in the world. Consider the Great Pyramid again, its base aligned with incredible precision to true north. Scholars still marvel at how they achieved it. Some believe they watched the shadows of the stars. Others suggest the use of plumb lines or water levels. What's clear is that the Egyptians didn't simply guess. They studied. They listened to the world, and it revealed its secrets. Time, too, was a measured thing. The Egyptians divided their days into 24 hours, 12 for daylight, 12 for night. They tracked the sun with shadow clocks and used water clocks to measure the night. They knew that the star Sirius rose just before the sun once a year, and that this event, unfailingly precise, marked the beginning of the flood and thus the new year. Their calendar of 365 days is still echoed in ours today, and yet perhaps their most remarkable invention was writing. Hieroglyphs were more than letters. They were sacred signs, symbols of sound, shape, and idea all at once. A single bird might mean flight or soul or the sound of a word. A ripple might be water, or movement, or a syllable. These symbols were carved on temple walls, painted on tombs, etched into amulets, and written with ink on scrolls of papyrus. Writing was believed to be a gift from Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and language. To write something down was not just to record it, but to make it real, eternal, sacred. Scribes trained from childhood, memorizing hundreds of signs. They sat cross-legged in the shade, with boards on their knees, dipping reeds into red and black ink. They wrote contracts, laws, hymns, poems, recipes, medical texts, love letters, and histories. Through their hands, the civilization kept its voice. And so we find that knowledge in ancient Egypt was not locked away in towers or sealed in scrolls for the few. It was lived, embodied, shared. From the healer mixing herbs by firelight, to the farmer measuring his plot, to the scribe copying spells for the afterlife, knowledge flowed like the river, quiet, steady, essential. Let your mind drift now to a small room at the edge of a temple. An oil lamp flickers, casting soft shadows on the walls. A scroll lies open, its surface smooth and pale. You hear the gentle scratch of a reed pen, the faint rustle of papyrus, the hush of a page turned with reverence. Here, you are in the presence of something ancient and enduring, a civilization that understood how to observe, how to heal, how to measure and record, not to control the world, but to live in balance with it. In this gentle rhythm of knowledge, this blend of science and spirit, we find a lesson not just about the past, but about presence, about paying attention, about the wisdom that waits in quiet places. So let yourself rest now in this soft room of ink and memory. Let the knowledge of Egypt hold you. Let it whisper what it always has, that to know something deeply is to care for it, and to care is to honor the life it holds. Chapter 5. The stars above, the gods within. Night settles over the land of Egypt. The sun has dipped below the western horizon, just as it has done for thousands of years. But in the Egyptian mind, this sunset was never an end. It was the beginning of another journey, one taken by the sun god Ra, who would now sail through the underworld, only to rise again come morning. The sky above is clear, dark, still, and slowly the stars begin to appear. To the people of ancient Egypt, the night sky was not an empty space. It was a living map, a sacred text, a realm of gods and spirits. They watched the stars with quiet reverence, not simply for beauty, but for meaning. Each point of light was a presence, a guide, a sign that the universe was in harmony. They knew the patterns. They knew which stars rose just before dawn and which vanished as the sun appeared. They knew the constellations that ruled each season, and they especially watched Sirius, the brilliant star they called Sobdet. Each year, just before the flood season, it rose in the early morning sky. This event marked the beginning of the Egyptian New Year. It was a moment of celebration, of preparation, of renewal. The river would rise, the fields would drink, and life would begin again. To observe the sky was not separate from spiritual life. It was an act of devotion, a practice of remembering one's place in the great order of things. And this sense of cosmic belonging shaped how they thought about the soul, the afterlife, and the journey beyond death. For the Egyptians, death was not to be feared. It was not a void or a silence. It was a passage, a transition to another form of existence. And they believed that with the right guidance, the soul could navigate the worlds beyond and find peace among the stars. The soul was made of many parts, each with its own purpose. The ka was the life force, the energy that animated the body. The ba was the personality, free to travel between the worlds of the living and the dead. The aksh was the transfigured soul, the part that became immortal, shining among the stars. When a person died, their body was preserved not as a shell, but as a sacred vessel. It was washed, anointed, wrapped in linen, and placed in a tomb filled with offerings, bread, beer, amulets, and sacred texts. The most famous of these texts was the Book of the Dead, a collection of hymns, spells, and instructions for the soul's journey. It was not a book of doom, but of reassurance, a travel guide for the great beyond. The soul would pass through the underworld, facing trials and questions. It would encounter gates and guardians, serpents and judges, and finally, it would stand before Osiris, the Lord of the Dead. Here, the heart would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the feather of truth and balance. If the heart was light, the soul would pass on to the field of reeds, a paradise where life continued in peace. If the heart was heavy with wrongdoing, it would be devoured, and the soul would not continue. But this judgment was not feared. It was trusted. It was a chance to be seen clearly, to be known, to be welcomed home by the gods. The stars too played their part. The constellation we call Orion was associated with Osiris, Sirius nearby with Isis, his beloved. These stars rose together, just as their myths were joined, stories of death and rebirth, of love and restoration. The sky reflected the stories mirrored the sky. Pharaohs, in particular, were believed to ascend to the heavens upon death. Tombs were aligned so that shafts pointed toward the circumpolar stars, the imperishables that never set. These stars were eternal, always present, always shining. It was among them that the king would take his place, becoming divine, watching over the world forever. Even in ordinary burials, this celestial connection remained. Coffins were painted with stars. Ceilings of tombs were deep blue, scattered with gold, like the night sky. The journey of the soul was not downward, but upward, into the sky, into the light, into eternity. Temples, too, were aligned with the stars. Their doorways captured the rising sun on solstice. Their columns mimicked celestial forms. They were not just buildings, but instruments, designed to tune the human world to the rhythms of the cosmos. Imagine now lying in the desert, far from the glow of firelight. The air is cool. The silence is complete. Above you, the stars shimmer, clear, ancient, familiar. You feel their presence not just above, but around you. The sky is not distant, it is close. A dome of memory, a cradle of spirit. And in this stillness you understand what the Egyptians felt, that the soul does not end, it transforms. It joins something greater, something eternal. The rituals they practiced were not grim or morbid. They were careful, beautiful acts of care. To prepare a loved one for burial was an honor. To chant the names of the dead was to keep them present. Names were carved in stone not to impress, but to ensure remembrance, for to speak a name was to keep a soul alive. Even dreams were considered messages from the other side. Sleep was a gentle brush with the eternal. It was believed that the soul could travel during sleep, visiting places beyond the body. This idea brought comfort, the sense that those who had gone were never far. And so they lit lamps at night, told stories of the gods, watched the stars turn slowly overhead, and trusted in the journey. Tonight, as you rest, you are part of that same rhythm. Your breath slows, your body softens, your thoughts drift upward, like the bee, like a bird in flight. You are held in the same sky, beneath the same stars, seen by the same constellations. Let yourself float now, gently. Let the silence deepen. Let the ancient sky welcome you, just as it has welcomed so many before. You are not separate from the stars. You are part of them. And like the souls of Egypt's long-gone dreamers, you are timeless. Chapter 6. Symbols, Stories, and the Power of the Word. As the night deepens and the wind softens over the desert sands, you hear the quiet rustle of papyrus leaves and the gentle murmur of a story being told. In ancient Egypt, stories were not simply entertainment. They were how people understood the world, how they made sense of birth and death, of storms and stars, of kings and farmers and everything in between. Language, whether spoken, painted, or carved in stone, was sacred, a thread that connected all things, past and present, human and divine, earth and sky. At the heart of this sacred thread was writing. Egyptian writing began as early as 3000 BCE, and the earliest forms, hieroglyphs, were not letters in the way we think of them now. They were images, symbols. Each one held a sound, an idea, and a power. A falcon might represent the god Horus, but it could also mean sky, or stand in for a sound in someone's name. A spiral might mean time, or eternity. Hieroglyphs were visual poetry, rich, layered, deeply expressive. To the Egyptians, to write was to create. The god Thoth, who was said to have invented writing, was also the god of wisdom, memory, and the moon. When a scribe wrote down a name or a spell, they weren't just recording something, they were giving it presence. Words weren't just descriptive, they were transformative. They could summon protection, preserve identity, and even guide a soul into the afterlife. Papyrus scrolls were carefully prepared from river reeds, pounded flat and dried in the sun. Onto these smooth, pale surfaces, scribes painted with brushes made from reeds, dipped in black or red ink. They worked slowly, methodically, not just copying letters, but shaping reality. But writing was only one way the Egyptians preserved their stories. Many tales lived in the voice, passed down around fires, on rooftops, or beside the river in the quiet of evening. Storytelling was a way to teach, to laugh, to wonder. A grandfather might speak of the gods and their feuds. A mother might tell of clever animals and magical boats. A priest might recite the myth of creation to explain the stars above. One of the most beloved tales was the story of Osiris, Isis, Horus, and Set. It is a story of life and death, of betrayal and loyalty, of grief and hope. Osiris, the wise and just king, is betrayed by his jealous brother Set, who cuts his body into pieces and scatters them across the land. Isis, his devoted wife, gathers each piece with care, mourning him with every step. She brings him back to life just long enough to conceive a son, Horus, who will one day grow strong and challenge Set for the throne. This story was not just mythology. It was a mirror of the Egyptian worldview, a cycle of loss and restoration, of justice and rebirth. It echoed in the seasons, in the journey of the sun, in the process of mummification. And it brought comfort. Even in the face of death, there was a promise of return. Another tale spoke of the journey of Ra, the sun god, through the underworld. Each night Ra sailed a great bark, a celestial boat, through 12 gates, facing dangers and tests, accompanied by gods who protected him. At the darkest hour, he faced the serpent Apep, a force of chaos and shadow. But Ra, with the help of those who believed, always triumphed. He emerged at dawn, reborn in light. To hear these stories was to be reminded, light follows dark. Order can defeat chaos. The world is not random, but rhythmic. And then there were gentler tales, stories of animals that spoke, of peasants who outwitted the powerful, of gods who wept, laughed, and learned. These weren't only for children, they were lessons wrapped in imagination, ways of exploring human nature, divine justice, and moral truth. Even love found its way into their verses. In poems preserved on pottery and scraps of papyrus, young lovers whisper longings to each other across time. A girl compares her beloved to lotus blossoms. A boy dreams of walking beside the river, just to catch a glimpse of her reflection. These words are tender, full of warmth. They show that beyond the grandeur of temples and kings, Egypt was also a land of feeling, of song, of sweet longing. The Egyptians didn't just write about the sacred or the royal. They wrote about everyday life, contracts, inventories, letters, jokes. In one preserved letter, a young man apologizes to his friend for missing a visit, blaming a headache. Another letter urges a brother to bring more figs next time. These small notes, faded but legible, show that the Egyptians were not so different from us. They cherished kindness, sought connection, and found meaning in little things. Their literature reflects this balance of grandeur and simplicity, of myth and memory. In a story carved onto the walls of a tomb, a farmer pleads for justice after his goods are stolen. He doesn't shout, he doesn't threaten. He speaks with wisdom, logic, and poetry. And in the end, justice is served. It is a tale of Mayat, of balance and fairness, taught not by sermon, but by story. Even the process of reading was layered. Hieroglyphs could be read left to right to left, or top to bottom, depending on which way the animals and people faced. And often, texts were accompanied by illustrations, vibrant scenes of gods, animals, ceremonies. The visual and verbal worked together, inviting the viewer not just to read, but to enter. The tombs of the pharaohs and nobles were often inscribed with texts meant to guide them in the afterlife. Spells, prayers, maps, all written in the hope that the soul would reach peace. To walk through these tombs today is to step into a world of words, a place where every wall speaks. Imagine yourself now seated in a quiet courtyard, the sun low, the scent of palm resin drifting through the air. An elder begins to speak, their voice slow and even. They are telling a story passed down through generations. Around you, children listen with wide eyes. Even the birds seem to quiet themselves, as if the whole world wants to hear. In that moment, time blurs. You are no longer in the present. You are somewhere timeless, somewhere gentle, somewhere sacred. Because stories, the Egyptians believed, were bridges. They connected people across generations. They carried wisdom from the distant past to the uncertain future. And they soothed the soul, especially in the stillness of night. So let your breath soften now. Let the words drift over you like cool river air. Let the myths and memories wrap around you like linen, gentle, protective, warm. You are safe in the story, safe in the language of a people who knew the power of a name, the beauty of a tale, and the calm truth that stories, like stars, will always return. Chapter 7. A legacy that never sleeps. The desert sleeps now, blanketed in cool shadow. The Nile glides on in silence, as it has for millennia, reflecting the stars above like scattered seeds of light. And though the pharaohs are long gone, their world has never truly disappeared. Ancient Egypt endures, not only in its monuments, but in the deep, quiet ways it continues to shape our thinking, our stories, our science, and our sense of wonder. Its pyramids still rise above the Giza plateau, unyielding to time and weather. Tourists stand in awe, snapping pictures. But it is not just the scale that amazes us, it is the mystery, the how, the why, the perfect geometry, the celestial alignments, the sense of precision without modern tools. These stone mountains whisper something we still don't fully understand. And perhaps that's what draws us back, again and again, the sense that there is something more to know, something timeless. Their influence began early. When the Greeks entered Egypt, scholars like Pythagoras and Plato encountered Egyptian temples and wisdom. Pythagoras is said to have studied in Egyptian schools for over 2 decades, absorbing geometry and cosmology. The Greeks admired the Egyptian priests, not only for their rituals, but for their deep understanding of the stars, the body, the mind. Much of what would become classical thought was shaped in this exchange: mathematics, medicine, ethics. The famous library of Alexandria, though Greek in name, stood on Egyptian soil and preserved thousands of scrolls from across the ancient world. It became a meeting place of minds, echoing Egypt's long legacy of learning. The Romans too were drawn in. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, spoke many languages, including Egyptian, and held court in the spirit of the goddess Isis. Even after Egypt became a Roman province, its temples remained places of reverence and learning. Emperors took inspiration from Egyptian art and design. Obelisks were transported across the empire. Egyptian motifs, the ankh, the scarab, the lotus, appeared in Roman architecture and jewelry. And still, Egypt lingered. In the Islamic Golden Age, scholars translated Egyptian texts. They studied its astronomy, medicine, and architecture, keeping its wisdom alive through centuries of transformation. Even the word alchemy, the ancient forerunner to chemistry, comes from the Arabic al-Khamiyah, which itself is rooted in Kemet, the ancient Egyptian name for their land. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Egyptomania swept through Europe. Napoleon's scholars sketched temples and copied inscriptions. Obelisks were raised in Paris, London, and New York. Fashion, art, and architecture all borrowed Egyptian forms: columns, symmetry, symbolism. And with the discovery of the Rosetta Stone in 1799, a door finally opened. When Jean-François Champollion cracked the code of hieroglyphs, he unlocked a lost language. Suddenly, the voices of scribes and kings could be heard again. Stories that had been silent for 2,000 years returned. Today, we see Egypt in ways both grand and subtle. In architecture, from Washington's monuments to Parisian bridges, echoes of Egyptian design live on in modern cities. In medicine, many of the herbs and remedies first catalogued in Egyptian texts still have therapeutic uses. In science, their methods of observation, recording, and alignment laid a foundation for later developments in astronomy and engineering. Even in spirituality, Egypt has left its mark. The concept of weighing the heart, of ethical judgment after death, finds echoes in many belief systems. Their sense of balance, of miyat, continues to inspire discussions of justice, harmony, and truth, but perhaps their greatest legacy is wonder. To look at a pyramid, or a painted tomb, or a carefully carved amulet is to be reminded of the human desire to reach beyond, to connect with the eternal, to build something that speaks across time. The Egyptians did not see themselves as masters of nature, but as part of it. Their rituals were rooted in gratitude, their art in awe, their science in listening. They didn't rush, they aligned. They did not separate body and spirit, they honored both. And in doing so, they created something rare, a civilization of depth and care, one that breathed in rhythm with the river, the stars, the soul. Today, we live in a world of speed, of change, but Egypt reminds us of something slower, something enduring. It invites us to listen, to pause, to look up at the sky and see not emptiness, but meaning. It invites us to imagine a life where each gesture is sacred, each word carefully chosen, each day lived in quiet reverence for the world and its mysteries. Let yourself imagine now, standing at the edge of the Nile, just before dawn. The air is cool, the sky is turning a soft indigo, the first birds have begun to stir. In the distance, a temple wall catches the light, and for a moment, time disappears. You are no longer in the present, you are outside of time, standing in the same stillness as the farmers, scribes, healers, and storytellers who lived and breathed under these same stars. The sand beneath your feet, the river beside you, the mountains beyond, all of it unchanged, and within you, a quiet knowing, a peace, a sense that you are part of something vast, beautiful, and ancient. Because ancient Egypt was never just about kings and monuments. It was, and remains, a civilization of balance, of care, of deep listening. And in remembering them, we remember something about ourselves. So rest now. Let your thoughts drift like a boat on calm waters. Let the stories of this land cradle you in sleep, and know that in the silence, in the stillness, you are held by time, held by history, held by the gentle legacy of a people who knew that life, when lived with wonder, never ends. And now the night is deep. The stars, still silent above the Nile, continue their slow, eternal drift across the heavens. The river flows on, gentle and dark, whispering softly as it moves. You've journeyed through a land of golden sun and sacred shadow, of stone and story, of knowledge etched in silence and devotion sung in stars. We have wandered through temples and tombs, through dusty libraries and quiet courtyards. We have met farmers tending to the land, scribes bent over their scrolls, healers mixing herbs, and storytellers weaving the world into words. We have looked up at constellations that have not changed, and felt perhaps the same quiet awe as they once did, thousands of years ago. Ancient Egypt may be gone in form, but its spirit endures, in our myths, in our measurements, in our architecture and our art, in the way we watch the sky, wonder about the soul, and long to be remembered. There is a deep comfort in that, in knowing that time does not erase everything, that some truths, some beauties, some rhythms simply continue. So wherever you are, however you came to find this moment, know that you've shared something timeless tonight, a story older than pyramids, a silence deeper than sleep, a peace carved in stone, yet soft as a lotus petal on water. Let yourself breathe slowly now. Let the warmth of these ancient memories settle gently in your chest. Let the questions drift away, like reeds on the current. There is nothing more to do, nowhere else to be. You are safe, you are still, you are enough. If you found peace in this journey, if you felt the calm of history hold you, we gently invite you to support this space, to like this video, to subscribe to the channel, and to return whenever you wish to drift off into a softer, wiser world. This is Drift Off to History, where calm stories meet curious minds. Thank you and good night.